Disclaimer before we get started, I am not a doctor or a medical professional. This podcast is not meant to give medical advice or education, merely entertainment. If you have a medical question, please ask your doctor. Thank you. Hello friends, welcome to Crocheting Through Medical History. I am Maria, here to crochet and talk about medical history. Sorry for my absence last week. If you follow me on Instagram, you'll know I literally recorded an entire episode and it did not save. It would not process after I was done recording, so I simply had wasted like 45 minutes of my time. I'm kind of like getting over a little cold thing, or I've kind of had like a little throat cold for like 2 weeks, and I like almost lost my voice over the weekend, but I want to do this because I'm upset that last week didn't work. I do have hot coffee. It was hot when I made it. It's not too hot anymore. It's kind of warm-ish. I'm crocheting little flowers. I'll show you at the end. Let's just get into it because I would love to. So today we're talking about the dancing plague of 1518. Thank you to Ash for suggesting this. How have I knotted my yarn already? I haven't even literally started with this color. This is just an article read, because last week I didn't research, and then this week I didn't research. Hopefully next week I'll research, but I make no promises. So for today we're just reading some articles, but that's okay because they're written by professionals, so they're better. Anyway, I'm doing so bad already. I don't think this was the project to work on, but it's the one that I have to work on. So I'm just going to multitask so poorly. This first article is on allthat'sinteresting.com. It was published in 2022. So, on July 14th, 1518, a woman named Frau Trophia from the city of Strasbourg in modern-day France left her house and began to dance. She kept going and going for hours until she finally collapsed, sweating and twitching on the ground. As if in a trance, she started dancing again the following day and the day after that, seemingly unable to stop. Others soon started following suit, and she was eventually joined by some 400 other locals who danced uncontrollably alongside her for about 2 full months. No one knows what caused the townspeople to dance against their will or why the dancing persisted for so long, but in the end, as many as 100 people died. Historians dubbed the bizarre and deadly event the Dancing Plague of 1518, and we're still sorting through its mysteries 500 years later. Though the historical record of the Dancing Plague, also known as Dancing Mania, is often spotty, surviving reports give us a window into this unusual epidemic. After the Dancing Plague commenced with Frau Trophia's fervent yet joyless marathon of movement, her body eventually succumbed to severe exhaustion that left her in a deep sleep. But this cycle, much to the bewilderment of her husband and onlookers, repeated every day, no matter how bloody and bruised her feet became. It's a little flower. What do I do next? I think I forgot. I don't know what I'm doing. Why am I doing this? Unable to summon any rational explanation, the crowds of people who witnessed Trophia's dancing suspected it was the handiwork of the devil. She had sinned, they said, and was therefore unable to resist the powers of the devil who had gained control over her body. But as quickly as some had condemned her, many townspeople began to believe that Trophia's uncontrollable movements were divine intervention. Locals in the area believed in the lore of Saint Vitus, a Sicilian saint martyred in 303 AD, who was said to curse sinners with uncontrollable dancing mania if angered. After suffering several days of nonstop dancing with no explanation for her uncontrollable urge, Tropia was brought to a shrine high up in the Vosges Mountains, possibly as an act of atonement for her purported sins. But it didn't stop the mania. The dancing plague swiftly took over the city. It was said that 30 people quickly took her place and began dancing with mindless intensity in both public halls and private homes, unable to stop themselves, just like Tropia. Eventually, reports say as many as 400 people began dancing in the streets at the dancing plague's peak. The chaos continued for some 2 months, causing people to keel over and sometimes even perish from heart attacks, strokes, and exhaustion. One account claims that there were upwards of 15 deaths every day when the dancing plague was at its height. In the end, about 100 people may have died thanks to this bizarre epidemic. Okay, counting is very important, so my apologies. I must count to 7. I believe in myself. I can count to 7. However, skeptics of this outrageous tale have understandably questioned how exactly people could dance almost continuously for weeks on end. In order to investigate the plausibility of the dancing plague of 1518, it's important to start by sorting through what we know to be historical fact and what we know to be hearsay. Modern historians say there's enough literature surrounding the phenomenon to corroborate that it did actually happen. Experts first uncovered the dancing plague thanks to contemporaneous local records. Experts first uncovered the dancing plague thanks to contemporaneous local records. Among them is an account written by the medieval physician Paracelsus, who visited Strasbourg 8 years after the plague struck and chronicled it in his Opus Paramirum. What's more, copious records of the plague appear in the city's archives. One section of these records describes the scene. There's been a strange epidemic lately going amongst the folk, so that many in their madness began dancing, which they kept up day and night without interruption until they fell unconscious. Many have died from it. A chronicle composed by the architect Daniel Specklin that's still kept in the city archives described the course of events, noting that the city council came to the conclusion that the bizarre urge to dance was the result of overheated blood in the brain. In a misguided attempt to cure the townspeople of the plague, the council interposed a counterintuitive solution. They encouraged victims to continue their dancing, perhaps in the hopes that people would inevitably tire out safely. Ooh, it's so cute. The council provided guild halls for the people to dance in, enlisted musicians to provide accompaniment, and, according to some sources, paid strongmen to keep the dancers upright for as long as possible by lifting their exhausted bodies as they whirled around. After it became clear that the dancing plague wouldn't end anytime soon, the council employed the extreme opposite of their initial approach. They decided that infected people had been consumed by holy wrath, and so penance was enforced on the town along with banning of music and dancing in public. According to city documents, the delirious dancers were eventually taken to a shrine dedicated to Saint Vitus located in a grotto in the hills in the nearby town of Saverne. There, the dancers' bloody feet were placed into red shoes before they were led around with a wooden figurine of the saint. Miraculously, the dancing I wasn't looking when I cut my yarn, apparently. The sacrifices that I make for you people. That's distressing. Oh my gosh. Miraculously, the dancing finally came to an end after several weeks, but Whether any of those measures helped and what caused the plague in the first place remained mysterious. 5 centuries later, historians are still unsure about what caused the dancing plague of 1518. Modern explanations vary, though one claims that the dancers suffered effects of psychotropic mold known as ergot, which grows on damp stalks of rye and can produce a chemical similar to LSD. But even though ergotism, which some say caused the Salem witch trials, can bring on delusions and spasms, other symptoms of the condition include an extreme decrease in blood supply, which would have made it challenging for people to dance as hard as they did. Offering another theory, historian John Waller posited that the dancing plague was simply a symptom of medieval mass hysteria. Waller, author of A Time to Dance, A Time to Die, The Extraordinary Story of the Dancing Plague of 1518, and the foremost expert on the subject, believes mass hysteria brought on by horrific conditions in Strasbourg at the time, extreme poverty, disease, and starvation, caused the townspeople to dance from stress-induced psychosis. He argued that this collective psychosis was possibly exacerbated by the supernatural beliefs common in the region, namely the lore surrounding Saint Vitus and his dance-inducing powers. There had previously been at least 10 other outbreaks of inexplicable dancing mania centuries before the events of Strasbourg took place. According to sociologist Robert Bartholomew, these plagues and this happened last time too. This sentence doesn't make sense, so I'm going to read it verbatim, and I don't know how to inflect it. According to sociologist Robert Bartholomew, these plagues and could see dancers parading around naked, making obscene gestures, and even fornicating in public or acting like barnyard animals. Dancers could also become violent towards observers if they did not join in. All of these examples of dancing mania took root in towns near the river Rhine, where the legend of Saint Vitus was strongest. Waller cited the theory of environment of belief, proposed by U.S. anthropologist Erica Bergignan, which argues that supposed spirit possessions occur primarily where supernatural ideas are taken seriously. This, in turn, encourages believers to enter a dissociative mental state in which their normal consciousness is disabled, causing them to carry out irrational physical acts. The cultural norm of believing in a higher power, Waller continued, made people susceptible to adopt extreme behaviors spurred by the dissociative states of others. This is stressful. I'm gonna look. Got my scissors. I'm going to look and cut only the yarn that I want to cut. This looks like a Pokemon to me. Do you guys know what Pokemon I'm thinking of? It's someone that could never beat Pokemon. I was so bad at it, so I gave up, but I sure did play quite a bit. I simply could never do it. But this looks like a Pokemon, or there's something in my head that I'm thinking of that this looks like. Maybe I'll find it. I'll put a picture somewhere if I do. Anyway, this in turn encourages believers to enter a dissociative. I think I already read that part. Okay. If the dancing mania really was a case of mass psychogenic illness, we can also see why it engulfed so many people. Few acts could have been more conducive to triggering an all-out psychic epidemic than the counselor's decision to corral all the dancers in the most public parts of the city, Waller wrote in The Guardian. Their visibility ensured that other city folk were rendered susceptible as their minds dwelt on their own sins and the possibility that they might be next. If Waller's theory of a mass psychological illness does indeed explain the dancing plague, it's a prime and terrifying example of how the human mind and body can work together to create chaos. Alrighty diety, guys, that was one article. So this next article is on thelancet.com, written by John Waller and published in 2009. On Christmas Eve in 1021, 18 people gathered outside of church in the German town of Kolbig and danced with wild abandon. The priest, unable to perform mass because of the irreverent din from outside, ordered them to stop. Ignoring him, they held hands and danced a ring dance of sin, clapping, leaping, and chanting in unison. The enraged priest, recorded a local chronicler, cursed them to dance for an entire year as punishment for their outrageous levity. It worked. Not until the following Christmas did the dancers regain control of their limbs. Exhausted and repentant, they fell into a deep sleep. Some of them never woke. It might seem improbable to us, but there was nothing in the story that medieval people found hard to believe. Compulsive dancing joined that litany of natural and human disasters to be explained in terms of celestial or supernatural forces. But even if much of the chronicler's account is clearly the stuff of legend, we should not dismiss it as purely invention. Plenty of sources indicate that this obscure chronicler may have embellished a real event. The Kolbig incident is a contender for the first of the dancing plagues. Later, chronicler... Oh, I don't know what to do here now for this next part. I'm supposed to join these. But, like, how? Okay. Do we think we can figure this out? Do I know how to join as I go? I sure don't. I sure don't know how to join as I go. It is imperative that you are confident in your join as you go ability. I am not. I do though think I cannot do this while reading. Let's try. Alright. Later chronicles speak of a bout of unstoppable and sometimes fatal dancing in the German town Erfurt in 1247. Shortly after, 200 people were said to have danced impiously on a bridge over the Moselle River of Maastricht until it collapsed, drowning them all. Likewise, dozens of medieval authors recount the terrible compulsion to dance that in 1317 swept across western Germany, the Low Countries, the northeastern... I certainly can't do this. Alright, let's just read for a while. Likewise, dozens of medieval authors recount the terrible compulsion to dance that, in 1374, swept across western Germany, the Low Countries, and northeastern France. Chronicles agree that thousands of people danced in agony for days or weeks, screaming of terrible visions and imploring priests and monks to save their souls. A few decades later, the abbot of a monastery near the city of Trier recalled an amazing epidemic in which a collection of hallucinating dancers hopped and leapt for as long as 6 months, some of them dying after breaking ribs or loins. On a far larger scale was the outbreak that struck the city of Strasbourg in 1518, consuming as many as 400 people. One chronicle states that it claimed for a brief period at least about 15 lives a day as men, women, and children danced in the punishing summer heat. There were also several isolated cases during the 1500s and 1600s from Switzerland and the Holy Roman Empire of the mania gripping an individual or entire family. The dancing plagues are little remembered today, in part because they seem so unbelievable. But while the incidents at Kolbig, Erfurt, and Maastricht might be apocryphal, there is no question that the 1374 and 1518 epidemics occurred. Dozens of reliable chronicles from several towns and cities describe the events of 1374, and, of course, the 1518 epidemic can be minutely detailed with the help of municipal orders, sermons, and vivid descriptions left behind by the brilliant Renaissance physician Paracelsus. These outbreaks represent a real and fascinating enigma. One thing contemporary and modern writers have agreed: those who danced did so involuntarily. They writhed in pain, screamed for help, and begged for mercy. So what could have impelled them to dance against their will? One theory is that they had ingested ergo, a mold that grew on stalks of ripening rye and can cause hallucinations, spasms, and tremors. Epidemics of ergotism certainly occurred in medieval Europe when people ate contaminated flour. But this theory does not seem tenable, since it is unlikely that those poisoned by ergo could have danced for days at a time, nor would so many people have reacted to its psychotropic chemicals in the same way. The ergotism theory also fails to explain why virtually every outbreak occurred somewhere along the Rhine and Moselle rivers, areas linked by water but with quite different climates and crops. We do know, however, that the victims of dancing epidemics were experiencing altered states of consciousness. This is indicated by their extraordinary levels of endurance. In a trance state, they would have been far less conscious of their physical exhaustion and the pain of sore, swollen, and lacerated feet. Onlookers in 1374 also spoke of the afflicted as wild, frenzied, and seeing visions. The dancers yelled out the names of devils, had strange aversions and pointed shoes and the color red, and said they were drowning in a red sea of blood. There's even a drawing of 1564 by Pieter Bruegel the Elder, showing a group of women dancing uncontrollably, all of them wearing the distant, distracted, and divorced from reality expressions of the deeply entranced. High levels of psychological distress significantly increase the likelihood of an individual succumbing to an involuntary trance state. It is unlikely to be coincidence, therefore, that the 1374 dancing plague spread in the areas most savagely hit earlier in the year by the most devastating deluge of the 14th century. The people of Strasbourg and its environs were similarly experiencing acute distress in 1518 after a succession of appalling harvests, the highest grain prices for over a generation, the advent of syphilis, and the recurrence of such old killers as leprosy and the plague. Even by the grueling standards of the Middle Ages, these were bitterly harsh years for the people of Alsace. But if despair created the right conditions for an extreme psychological reaction, this does not explain why so many danced in their misery. Why did they not sob, scream, riot, fight, or fall into a sullen silence? This is where anthropological field studies prove to be invaluable. Accounts of possession rituals from the Arctic and Andes to the Kalahari and Caribbean show that people are more likely to enter the trance state if they expect it to happen, and that entranced participants behave in a ritualistic manner, their thoughts and motions shaped by the spiritual beliefs of their cultures. Female mediums in Madagascar, for instance, take on the distinct personas of the spirits believed to inhabit them. Similarly, the participants in voodoo rituals adopt the roles of specific deities drawn from a pantheon of gods with varying personalities. Were there, then, belief systems in the regions affected by the dancing plague that could have channeled widespread despair into an irresistible urge to dance? A variety of sources, from altar paintings to chronicles and law books, show that the dread of this punitive affliction formed part of the collective consciousness of the people of the Rhine and Moselle valleys. Those living near these mighty commercial waterways shared a profound fear of wrathful spirits able to inflict a dancing curse, and it is in this region alone, close to the western fringe of the Holy Roman Empire, that confirmed epidemics of dancing occurred. Moreover, these outbreaks nearly always struck in or close to cities affected by earlier dancing epidemics. In short, the epidemiological picture is strikingly consistent with a form of cultural contagion. Only where there was a pre-existing belief in a dancing curse could psychological distress be converted into the form of a frantic dance. Every so often, when physical and mental distress rendered people more than usually suggestible, the specter of the dancing plague could quickly return. All it then took was for one or a few poor souls believing themselves to have been subject to the curse to slip into a spontaneous trance. Then they would unconsciously act out the part of the accursed, dancing, leaping, and hopping for days on end. The course of the epidemics also suggests that they were driven by pious fear. From the outbreaks of 1374, 1463, and 1518, we know that dancing was thought to be both the affliction and its cure. There are accounts of people who had temporarily recovered their wits, deliberately dancing themselves back into the oblivion in the expectation that only in this way could the curse be lifted. For the same reason, in Strasbourg in 1518, the authorities mandated that the dancers go on dancing day and night, to which end they constructed a special stage in the heart of the city where they could move freely. They even hired professional dancers and musicians to keep them in constant motion. The policy was a disaster. From the dramatic escalation in the epidemic, it seems that the strategy helped spread a psychic contagion. In fact, nothing could have been better calculated to turn the dance into a full-scale epidemic than making its victims perform their dance in the most public of spaces. The authorities turned a crisis into a nightmare scenario worthy of a canvas by Hieronymus Bosch. Hieronymus Bosch. The central role of belief is also apparent in the speed with which epidemics abated once victims had prayed at appropriate shrines or undergone elaborate exorcism rituals. Perhaps more significantly, we have several accounts from the mid to late 1500s of cults of entranced dancing in towns close to the Black Forest where the Rhine enters the North Sea. Groups of distressed men and women deliberately entered a trance and then danced, accompanied by musicians, towards the shrines dedicated to the saints most widely associated with the dancing curse, St. Vitus and St. John. It seems that the dread of the dancing curse had been harnessed and controlled. A psychic epidemic had been turned into ecstatic religious ritual. In the mid-1600s, if not before, outbreaks of compulsive dancing had ceased to torment the people of Europe. Their disappearance coincided with the demise of fervent supernaturalism that had sustained them. In the late 17th century, the term St. Vitus's dance was appropriated to describe a quite different medical condition. But these bizarre events are well worth remembering, for they provide an object lesson in the power of our beliefs and expectations to shape the expression of psychological distress. In an age dominated by genetic explanations, the dancing plagues remind us that the symptoms of mental illnesses are not fixed and unchanging, but can be modified by changing cultural milieus. At the same time, the phenomenon of the dancing mania in all its rich perversity reveals the extremes to which fear and supernaturalism can lead us. So, our very last article is on thecollector.com, written by Sabrina Williamson in 2022. This one's called Dancing Mania and the Black Plague, a craze that swept through Europe. In the Middle Ages of Europe, dancing was the latest craze, quite literally. Under the influence of dance mania, medieval Europeans would compulsively dance for hours or days without control. In the best cases, the dancers would dance until they fell asleep or fell into a trance. In the worst cases, the dancers would dance until they died. For centuries, scholars have been debating what could have caused dance mania. One theory argues that dance mania might have been a result of consuming hallucinogenic moldy bread, while other popular theory posits that dance mania was the same plague, Sydenham-chorea, that caused involuntary tremors in children. However, the most popular and widely accepted theory is that the Black Plague caused dance mania. I did do an episode on the Black Plague titled Black Death. If you are interested, I will link it up here somewhere, I think. You can find it. You should go listen. The events of the Black Plague are both stranger and crueler than fiction. To this day, the pandemic is considered one of the most dramatic events in history, and its effects were widespread, catastrophic, and downright odd. Dance mania, moreover, is thought to have been brought about by the mass hysteria of the time period. In the collective history of Europe, there has never been an event that scales remotely close to the Black Plague. It's estimated that the Black Plague killed 30 to 60% of the European population, meaning that 1 in 3 people at least died from the disease. As if unprecedented death was not harsh enough, the disease had a uniquely grim appearance, manifesting in oozing boils and rotting skin. Because of the brutal nature and hideous appearance of the Black Death, many thought that the pandemic was a God-sent punishment. Out of religious fervor, Christian mobs began to murder Jewish citizens by the thousands. Men called flagellants began to publicly beat themselves and others with sharp metal to atone for their sin. In fact, the religious fervor of the Black Plague had even led to later tragedies, including the witch hunts. Yet, at the same time, some were turning to witchcraft, pagan traditions, and general immorality. Some had thought that God had abandoned the world and reacted by turning to the physical world to cope. This meant that regional folk traditions, then labeled as heresy or witchcraft, became popular. It also meant that many were seeking out the pleasure of the world without any thought of morality. As a result, crime and chaos skyrocketed. Regardless of how they reacted, many were trying to understand death in a world ridden with terror and chaos. Whether they turned to Christianity or paganism, the impulse was the same. People were using a spiritual lens to psychologically cope with the collective trauma of the Black Plague. Oddly enough, Dance Mania was no exception. Underneath Dance Mania was a psychological reaction, perhaps even a method of collective processing. Throughout history in several societies, dance has had a pivotal role in processing trauma. In many societies, dance was used during funeral rituals to access trance. The history of dance is entwined with collective societal trauma and has precedents before and after Dance Mania. While one side of dance has evolved into commercial spectator sport, it is important to remember that dance is culturally and socially significant throughout the globe. In order to understand Dance Mania retrospectively, it is important to understand that dance is first and foremost a community service and natural occurrence. In the earliest human societies, dance was integral in community interactions. Before written language, dance served as a way to communicate social events, rituals, and processes. Whether it was a harvest, a birth, or a death, there was usually a ritual dance in place so that people might understand their role in a societal phenomenon. In darker times, dance had been used to process hard events. Because dance can be used to enter an altered state of consciousness, it was often a solution for working through difficult emotions and events. Consequently, various funeral rituals throughout the world include some form of cathartic dancing. Even in today's modern world, we can find several examples of dance funeral rites. For example, during a New Orleans jazz funeral, a band will lead a procession of mourners through the street. Before the burial, the band plays mournful music, but afterward, the band plays upbeat music and the mourners begin to dance with wild abandon. In several societies, dance has been used to process collective traumatic events. For instance, the Japanese art form Buto is believed to partly be a societal reaction to the nuclear bombing of Japan. In Buto, the dancers do not embody athleticism or poise, but interpret the sickened, weak, or elderly body. In addition, research into the African diaspora shows that dance has been used for psychological processing, wherein dance rituals are used for healing. Like language, dance is a natural phenomenon that occurs when a society has something to address, discuss, or process. Dance Mania, as a result, is most likely an attempt to address and process the trauma of the Black Plague. Although Dance Mania was most likely a psychological reaction to the Black Plague, it was often seen as a form of madness, a curse from God, or a sinner indulging in the sinful. But what did Dance Mania, also known as choreomania, actually look like? In one of the earliest instances of Dance Mania in Germany, a dancing mob was reported to bring down an entire bridge, resulting in the whole group's death. Unable to control themselves, something possessed them to act as a group to their own demise. Dance Mania officially developed into a public epidemic in 1374, beginning in Aachen, Germany. Justice Friedrich Karl Hecker, a 19th century health historian, depicted the event in The Black Death and the Dancing Mania. Quote, so early as the year 1374, assemblages of men and women were seen at Aix-la-Chapelle who had come out of Germany and who, united by one common delusion, exhibited to the public both in the streets and in the churches the following strange spectacle. They formed circles hand in hand and, appearing to have lost all control over their senses, continued dancing, regardless of the bystanders, for hours together, in wild delirium, until at length they fell to the ground in a state of exhaustion. They then complained of extreme oppression and groaned as if in the agonies of death, until they were swathed in cloths bound tightly round their waist, upon which they again recovered and remained free from the complaint until the next attack. Unquote. In essence, the participants moved freely, wildly, and as a unit, yet also felt severe pain and desperation to stop. After stopping, the mania might strike them again later. At first, they were considered cursed and mad. After this documented event in Aachen, Dance Mania swept through the rest of Germany and France. Throughout the affected areas, the participants would convulse, leap, clap, and hold hands. In some cases, they would recite and invoke the names of Christian deities. In other cases, they would speak in tongues. Sometimes the dancers would fall asleep after dancing and never wake again. Dance mania continued far into the 16th century in sync with plague resurgences, famine, and societal destruction. It was also documented before 1374 as far back as 700 AD. However, dance mania was at its height in the aftermath of the Black Plague. The Black Plague resulted in cross-cultural and intergenerational trauma. As a result of the pandemic, medieval Europeans developed a fascination with death, demonstrated in the artwork of the period. Even for centuries to come, painters would use the Black Plague as subject matter. In day-to-day life, however, the effects were felt more immediately, such as through dance mania. The Black Death's timeline is from 1346 to 1352, and the Dance Mania epidemic occurred around 1374, around 20 years later. The areas that experienced Dance Mania, coincidentally, were the areas that were most impacted by the Black Plague. Medieval peoples were under extreme psychological distress in the plague's aftermath and resurgences. Consequently, they likely entered an almost reflexive-like trance state through the Dance Mania. Dance mania is evidence of extreme mental and social suffering, but also evidence of how dance functions on a primal level. Over humanity's collective history, dance has been a form of language played out in the physical body. In Dance Mania, we see the repercussions of extreme and continual agony, but we also see people processing the agony together as a community. How does a society exit such a dramatic event like the Black Plague? For an event as large and overarching as Black Plague, many turned to group trance, possibly because they experienced the horror of the Black Death together. 1 in 3 people died in the plague, making death immediately universal and closely felt. Possibly, dance mania was a subconscious way to physically manifest the emotional scars of the plague. From this era, we know how people during the time processed mass tragedy. Dance mania clues us in on the tragic event during one of the bleakest eras in human history. Given the dreadful circumstances, perhaps the occurrence of dance mania isn't so strange after all. We did it! I'll link the links to those articles in the description, so you can go read them if you want. Fact check. This is my reading. I'm sorry I sound like this. I feel not great about it, but it's too late. I'm not recording this a third time. Second time is it, and I'm done. I didn't talk about my crochet stuff earlier because I wanted to just get into it because I feel like people don't really want to listen to me talk about crochet, so I'm going to save it till the end so they can leave, but still have heard the episode if they want to. So, like I was working on, this is going to be an African flower Triceratops little plushie. I'm very excited. I got all of these monocolored flowers done of different shapes. There's pentagons and hexagons and heptagons. 7 heptagon, 6 sides is hexagon, and then some pentagons and a square. So I got these done, and I'm working on now the colored ones, and I'm trying to join them together as I go. You saw it is not going great. I also dropping things. Mostly finished. This fanny pack bag. Isn't it cute? I made it with my friend Hannah. Hers looks much better. She tried a lot harder than I did. I kind of threw it together at the last minute, and it is not done because I have this adjustable strap with this little buckle, but I don't have the little strap adjuster thing that actually lets it adjust. So I just kind of safety pinned it together so I could use it. But it is certainly not done. We'll see when it gets done, as it is usable. But it's so cute. We saw it on, there's a bunch of like TikToks with this, or Instagram Reels, because I don't believe in TikTok. I use Instagram Reels instead. I did most of last week spend my time working on this bucket hat. Did you? Yeah, I was working on this last time. It's not, I went wrong somewhere, I will admit. It is very like short, and it is not shaped well. I haven't finished sewing in all the ends, but it's kind of just like sits. It's more like a bonnet than a hat, you know? I shaped it after hat, so I don't know where I went wrong. So I don't know how much use I will get out of this. It's just so like shallow, you know? And then I tried to use Mod Podge to make this part stick out more, and it kind of worked. I didn't dilute it because I didn't have a sponge. But yeah, this is a hat. We'll see if I can like block it out to like make it fit better. I don't know. We'll see. It's clearly got some problems, but I still made it. Will I finish sewing in the ends? Maybe, maybe not. There's a lot less than there used to be. There's still a lot. This is a lot less than there used to be. Believe me. But yeah, I feel like this is a good look. Look how cool I am. So, thank you for joining me today. As always, like, follow, if you have a topic suggestion, comment it below or DM me, or comment on my Instagram at Maria Makes Makes. Sorry, I gave Ponyo some drugs, because I need to cut his nails, and he's so sleepy. Oh, he's so funny looking. You ready to get your nails cut? Yeah, he's so sleepy. Sorry, he just did a big yawn, and he looked so tired. Oh, he did a little sleep. Okay, good night. Anyway, yeah, like, follow my podcast, subscribe if you're on YouTube at Maria Hegerman, share with your friends, rate or review. If you have a suggestion, let me know. If you have a condition that you would be willing to talk to me about, hit me up. I would love to talk to you and get your point of view on the topic that I talk about. Yeah. I hope you had a good time. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I will see you for realsies next week. Bye!